Welcome back to the next segment here of Unbound Radio, the Webster Tarpley Program. Please bear with us. We're having some technical difficulties. Anyway, there it is in a nutshell. Right? Plenty of things that look bad. I would also point to one interesting observation. Congressman Peter King, liberal, reactionary Republican of New York, and what he says is that the budget cuts have gone too far, that the police and other first responders have been cut under the sequester and other provisions, and that has now gone too far. There's an interesting angle. If you want to respond to this politically, you could say, well, what were the budget arrangements there under Deval Patrick and so forth? Police austerity might sound good to some people, anti-government types, but not a good thing. And then just the negligence, right? Why were there trash cans? Why are trash cans allowed at all? In the New York City subway, around downtown Washington, there are no trash cans left. You can try that if you've got some messy piece of, hot dog wrapper or something. There's no place to get rid of it. So let's then just try to wrap this up. Suppose this turns out to be a false flag. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to reorient the whole agitation towards that? Are you going to go out and start gathering tens of thousands of signatures to force the state of Massachusetts to have some kind of an investigation? No, you're not going to do that, are you? Instead, what you have to do is have your own strategy. And having your own strategy means you've made up your mind well before this, based on the underlying tendencies of this whole epoch that we're living through, that there are some things you cannot do. You cannot organize a mass movement based on a foreign war, unless it's a war of the dimensions of World War I in Europe or something like that. You must get a mass movement, because if you don't get a mass movement with progressive contents, then you get nowhere. So a method based on a foreign war won't work. The other one that will not work is a method based on a false flag event. That is the lesson of the previous decade. From 2001 to 2007, 2008, there was something of a mass movement about 9/11 and around the impeachment of Bush and Cheney. And instead, that didn't turn out well at all, right? And it essentially, in some ironic ways, you can say one of the main beneficiaries of all that was little Rand Paul, who now wants to use his father's mailing list and his father's notoriety, which was fueled by some very naive and very misguided people in the 9/11 truth movement who thought that Ron Paul was an answer to false flag events. Well, maybe that put little Rand where he is now, hoping to contend for the presidency. We'll be back in just a minute here on Unbound Radio. Welcome back to the Webster Tarpley Program here on Unbound Radio. So we've wrapped up this Boston issue in the following terms. No matter what it is, let us remember that nothing works in the time ahead of us without a mass movement. You better have a mass movement, and it's got to be an anti-fascist, progressive mass movement. It's got to be capable of leading humanity out of the world economic depression, of saving human civilization with all the cultural and political values that are associated with that. It cannot be done based on a foreign war, other than a war of proportions which are not visible in the current world, although which certainly could emerge at different times. It cannot be done based on a false flag event, even one thousands of times bigger than the one we've just gone through. The only way you can organize such a mass movement is using mass traction economic demands. And if there's anything that can be said about these events, right, from Newtown to the Boston Marathon, we would say that whatever they are in themselves, their use by the Obama administration, by the reactionary Republicans, is to divert you from the mass traction economic demands. And that is, I think, where the difference comes in. Under Bush, terrorist acts lead directly into foreign wars. So at that rate, the refutation and demolition of the 9/11 argument, for example, had an immediate relevance to attempting to build a mass movement, which it succeeded at least to some degree in around 2006, 2007. But in this case, the event, as the Newtown story shows us, leads you into a blind alley. It leads you into an utterly futile, useless, and pointless collision between the gun fetishists and the gun demonizers. And in effect, what it does is it increases the fidelity, the allegiance of various pieces of the U.S. political spectrum, increases their allegiance to the existing political parties. Whereas what we want to do is lead them against the existing political parties. Now, how do we do that? Well, 80 to 90% of the American people want their economic rights. They regard Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and other programs, things like unemployment benefits, food stamps, Head Start, breakfasts for kids, WIC protein meals for expectant mothers and so forth. They see those as their economic rights. They own them. They have paid for them and they own them. The great irony of American politics, once again, is no political party is willing to fight for the things that the overwhelming majority of Americans want. You want to know why there's partisanship and division? It's because there's no New Deal entitlement party, which would immediately have the potential, at least, of enjoying, 2/3 to 3/4 to 9/10 of the American people. So I would urge you, keep your eyes fixed on this in very brutal military terms. When you're in military operations, if you want to consider politics under that light, in politics as in other pursuits, you stick to your own strategy. You do not go running after every little thing that the enemy throws at you, every diversion. You do not let yourself be diverted, and you do not choose to go and commit yourself to fighting on the terrain chosen by the enemy. You try to choose that terrain yourself. So therefore, for all of these reasons, I would urge that you keep your attention focused on what happened today. The Obama budget was sent to the Congress, and that's the one that's got the chained consumer price index, and it's got the $400 billion in Medicare cuts. Now, I say $400 billion in Medicare cuts. It's something like $370 billion more in Medicare cuts and $30 billion in other medical benefits. I suspect the Veterans Administration, the Pentagon TRICARE, and other things come in there. And what Obama did today in sending that budget, I think was revealing. He tried to play one generation against the other. But and this is it's a theme that has been developed by Peter Peterson of Lehman Brothers. Peter Peterson of Lehman Brothers and his Peterson Institute of International Economics over on Massachusetts Avenue across from the Brookings Institution. They say, let's play the old against the young. Let's play the people starting out against the retirees. I say no. Let's unite the entire population, ultimately the 99%, against the 1% of people like Peter Peterson, the former head of Lehman Brothers, and his tribe of hack austerity ghouls. So Obama says we want to save the entitlements, but we've got to make sure that not too much money goes to the elderly at the expense of the young. Well, let me point out, if Social Security and Medicare can be successfully attacked, as Obama is now openly and on paper proposing to do, then all of the entitlements are in mortal danger. And if you attack where the political consensus is greatest, that these things have to be maintained, if you break through on that, then after that, things like food stamps, unemployment benefits, Head Start, WIC, and things like that, S-chip, they are going to be child's play to attack and destroy. So now let's look a little bit more about this budget from Obama. One of the groups that Obama is attacking, let's just see it in terms of numbers, because the numbers are very impressive. It is thought that there are about 39 million people getting Social Security right now, and almost all of them are getting Medicare at the same time. Now, who are these people? It's not just old people. Remember, Social Security has components. There's an old age pension. Okay. There's a disability pension. Suppose you've been maimed or crippled on a dangerous job. You get Social Security disability. With the change CPI, those benefits would be eroded and attrited and cut over time, so that by the time you got to age 92, if you retired at 65, I guess, or 66, and you got yourself to 92, you would have lost 1 full month of benefits per year as a result of what Obama's talking about. So the old, the disabled, there's also a survivor's benefit. Widows, widowers, and orphans get a survivor's benefit. Obama wants to attack them. And veterans. The veterans are about 3.2 million disabled veterans who get Social Security benefits. So we're into the 40 to 45 million area, and this is the group. These are the groups that Obama proposes to attack. Now, I can imagine a plethora of photo opportunities of, again, the elderly, the disabled, coming in their wheelchairs and on crutches and so forth, the survivors' benefits, the widows, the orphans, the paraplegics, and then the disabled war veterans, the single, double, triple, quadruple amputees coming forward, the ones that the society claims to care so much about. These are the ones that Obama wants to attack. These are the people who will be hit. And you can see that the cultural and moral effect of this is to essentially, it destroys the moral fiber of a country that is willing to do that. Of course, it also destroys the political cohesion of the Democratic Party. Maybe we shouldn't worry too much about that, although we don't want the Democratic Party to collapse first. We want the Republicans to collapse first, and that's what Obama is threatening us with. So the savings, right, we're told these are savings that lead to reforms, reforms that lead to savings, in quotation marks. It ranges from a high estimate of $220 billion over 10 years to $130 billion, which is a lower estimate. And part of it has to do with to what degree is there some protection for precisely these groups, the very old, the disabled, the survivors, the widows, the orphans, the cripples, the maimed, and so forth, the paraplegics. But don't kid yourself. Some fig leaves of protection may be built in for those groups. But according to the American Association of Retired Persons, this will hit the oldest, people who have been on Social Security the longest, who generally don't have any other source of income or very little, will be hit hard. The poorest will be hit hard because they're the ones who have fewer other resources. Women, as we pointed out in the past week or so, women have been disproportionately targeted by this because they earn less during their careers. They rely on it more. Poverty is common, even as it is today. Poverty is common among the elderly. There are 9% of those over 65, I believe, who are considered below the poverty line, right? And the poverty line, as you know, is minimal. And then 5.7% who are near poor. So 15% poor and near poor of the people who are going to be getting cut. The way in which it's done is also maybe worth talking about. The chained consumer price index. Now, they've even called it the superlative consumer price index. What is this, and where does it come from? Back in the year 2002, in the full hysteria of 9/11, maybe there's a connection here. We can look at Boston and the chain CPI. The initiation of a data series known as the Chained Consumer Price Index goes back to 2002. Mad Dog Bush and the neocon gang, at the height of their powers, said, we're going to have a new data series, and we want to have that available so that it can be used for calculations, right? We won't do anything with it. The Labor Department calculates a number of these data series. One of them is called the CPI W. The CPI W seems to be the one that is used right now when they calculate the cost of living adjustment to Social Security and these other forms. It is the urban wage earner and clerical worker data series. But Peter Peterson, the austerity ghouls, Obama, Lou, and of course Republicans and many right-wing Democrats say this CPI-W is no good because it overstates inflation. It claims that there's more inflation than there really is. And the key part of this is the substitution effect. In other words, if you can't afford steak and you buy corned beef hash, they say that's no different. That's the same. So therefore, if you can fall back from the steak category or from a better cut of steak to a poorer cut of steak, and then you're going to fall down to hamburger and then down to, Spam or something like this, scrapple, then it's all meat, they say. So you shouldn't be compensated for that. That should be cut out of the data series. Now, the Labor Department's Consumer Price Index, CPI-W, measures 211 categories of buying and selling. As I've pointed out, this was already tampered with by Michael Boskin back in 1996 under Clinton, and he tried to doctor it as much as he could, but they're coming back now for a second bite at this apple. So that is what it looks like. It's a transparent effect to gouge and to chisel this benefit over time. And we'll be back in just a minute on Unbound Radio. Welcome back to Unbound Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting to you from Washington, D.C., the Webster Tarpley Program coming at you. So, to sum up what we have discussed, the Boston events, assuming the worst case scenario, the false flag route, would have been an attempt to divert from anti-austerity activism, to lead people into a blind alley, in the same way that the school shootings have led to this fundamentally asinine, futile conflict, the clash between the gun fetishists and the gun demonizers, a wedge issue of the most classic type, and increasing the cohesion of the Democrats and the Republicans when what we want to do is the opposite. The only way to regard this, then, is the only way to resist it is to refuse to be diverted. The purpose of these events in general is to try to suppress mass strike protests, mass strike actions beyond protest, towards rollback of austerity, the institution of a recovery program, and Wall Street sales tax, make the Wall Street banks pay for the depression, and then ultimately the key to the recovery, which is to begin seizing pieces of the Federal Reserve and forcing them to finance large parts of the recovery. Now, just about this, we got an interesting interview, a guy called, I think his name is Rosenstein. He's one of the governors of the Federal Reserve, and he points out that what has been done by the Fed up to now is not enough. So he essentially argues that there should be more QE3, And I would say, well, you're correct that the methods done so far have not worked, right? The consumer-led recovery of the stimulus and the supplemental of Pelosi and company, they did not work, although they had some positive effects as long as they lasted, did not generate a self-sustaining recovery. And certainly everything the Fed has done, the hot money measures, especially of QE 1, 2, and 3, have simply increased hot money. So the answer has to be to open a new Fed window for a credit stimulus of, a round figure, $3.6 trillion to finance the entire shovel-ready panoply of infrastructure projects here in the United States. So that's the answer to the debate that's going on inside the Federal Reserve. But just the fact that it's going on is an opening, and you always want to go where an opening is. People want to do Glass-Steagall. That would be okay. It might be easier if you had a bill to revise Dodd-Frank that might include the Glass-Steagall, but that you don't have. What you have instead is a budget bill. Taxes, entitlements, deficits, money in that sense. And that is where the Wall Street sales tax is indispensable. Without the Wall Street sales tax, I don't see how you get out of this, right? 11 European countries will have it. France and Italy and Hungary do have it, and we want it here. Now, in this context, before the Boston news arrived on Monday afternoon, Rush Limbaugh and his national program, old Rush of the Institute for Retarded Reactionary Ranting, he was on vacation, and he had a guy filling in for him, Doug Urbanski. Seems to be some kind of actor or Hollywood personality. I'm sure others know more about this than I do. At about 1:15 in the afternoon, Eastern Daylight Time on Monday, Doug Urbanski began attacking the financial transaction tax. My God, there it was. The Wall Street sales tax under attack on the Rush Limbaugh show. And he began saying, this is a very bad thing. This is a terrible idea. They're taxing everything, and where will it stop? Why they even want to tax financial transactions? Then a program break, and Urbanski dropped the theme. And I can imagine people in his control room, right? Maybe that Snurdly that Limbaugh always seems to be talking to said, drop that theme. Let sleeping dogs lie, right? The American sucker population does not realize that Wall Street pays no taxes. The whole tax debate ignores the fact that the Wall Street zombie bankers pay little to no corporate income tax, not 35%, but more like 0 to 3 to 5%. And at the same time, on the quadrillions of turnover, they pay absolutely nothing. So I say this is the way to go. Once the American people realize that Wall Street pays zero, there is a vehement desire to make them pay through the nose, and 1% is a good starting point, although many would say, no, let them pay the full sales tax of the state that they're operating in. So from 1% on up, if you want. Radical solutions are always useful if they skew the debate in the proper direction, because speculation is an evil, and 1% is a good start, but maybe that's not enough. And we're looking for $1 trillion of revenue, $500 billion for the feds, $500 billion for the states. If we had the Wall Street sales tax, there'd be enough cops in Boston so that the marathon could be fully policed. So Democrats are seeing themselves mocked. Obama's using them as a prop. It's time for them to fight back with the Wall Street sales tax and then the progressive nationalization of the Federal Reserve. So don't get distracted. Keep your eyes on the prize. We have a strategy. Don't be deflected. Don't be diverted. And we'll see you next under the sequester and other provisions. And that has now gone too far. There's an interesting angle. If you want to respond to this politically, you could say, well, what were the budget arrangements there under Deval Patrick and so forth? Police austerity might sound good to some people, anti-government types, but not a good thing. And then just the negligence, right? Why were there trash cans? Why are trash cans allowed at all? In the New York City subway, around downtown Washington, there are no trash cans left. You can try that if you've got some messy piece of hot dog wrapper or something. There's no place to get rid of it. So, welcome back to the next segment here of Unbound Radio, the Webster Tarpley Program. Please bear with us. We're having some technical difficulties. Anyway, there it is in a nutshell. Right? Plenty of things that look bad. I would also point to one interesting observation. Congressman Peter King, liberal, reactionary Republican of New York, and what he says is that the budget cuts have gone too far, that the police and other first responders have been cut of Bush and Cheney, and instead that didn't turn out well at all, right? And it essentially, in some ironic ways, you can say one of the main beneficiaries of all that was little Rand Paul, who now wants to use his father's mailing list and his father's notoriety, which was fueled by some very naive and very misguided people in the 9/11 truth movement who thought that Ron Paul was an answer to false flag events. Well, maybe that put little Rand where he is now, hoping to contend for the presidency. You cannot do. You cannot organize a mass movement based on a foreign war, unless it's a war of the dimensions of World War I in Europe or something like that. You must get a mass movement, because if you don't get a mass movement with progressive contents, then you get nowhere. So a method based on a foreign war won't work. The other one that will not work is a method based on a false flag event. That is the lesson of the previous decade, from 2001 to 2007, 2008. There was something of a mass movement about 9/11 and around the impeachment. Let's then just try to wrap this up. Suppose this turns out to be a false flag. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to reorient the whole agitation towards that? Are you going to go out and start gathering tens of thousands of signatures to force the state of Massachusetts to have some kind of an investigation? No, you're not going to do that, are you? Instead, what you have to do is have your own strategy. And having your own strategy means you've made up your mind well before this, based on the underlying tendencies of this whole epoch that we're living through, that there are some things